The Orion Alliance War Academy floated in the void like a jeweled crown, its hexagonal structures reflecting starlight in iridescent patterns. Situated on an artificial moon, orbiting the gas giant Ura 7, the Academy served as the premier training ground for the most promising military candidates from 6 different species across the known galaxy. Cadet Rilkina stood at perfect attention, his slender Virac frame exhibiting the characteristic gray-blue skin of his species. His 4 eyes, 2 primary and 2 secondary, focused straight ahead, while his commanding officer inspected the line of cadets. The War Academy's insignia gleamed on his chest plate, a point of pride for the young Virac, whose family had served in the Virac Defense Forces for 7 generations. "Today marks an important milestone in your education," announced Tactical Instructor Thrin, a stocky Braxian with mottled orange skin. "You will witness, for the first time, actual combat footage from Earth's conflicts. This represents a unique opportunity to study warfare conducted by a species that, until recently, was unknown to the Alliance." A slight murmur rippled through the formation of cadets. Earth footage was rare. The humans had only joined the galactic community 30 years ago, and they guarded their military archives closely. The Orion Alliance had negotiated for years to obtain these materials for educational purposes. "The viewing chamber has been prepared with atmospheric sections, suitable for each of your species," Instructor Thrin continued. "You will report there at 1400 hours. Dismissed." As the formation broke, Ryle turned to his friend Jax, a fellow Virac whose family had served alongside Ryle's for generations. "Finally," Jax said, his secondary eyes blinking in excitement. "I've been waiting for this since first cycle. Earth warfare is supposed to be different." Ryle nodded. "The instructors keep saying humans have unique tactical approaches. I'm curious to see what makes them special." "More than curious," said Mira, a Kalthari cadet whose crystalline exoskeleton glinted under the Academy lights as she approached. Unlike the taller Viracs, the Kalthari stood only to Real's chest, but their species' natural armor and resistance to extreme temperatures made them formidable allies. "I heard Major Vordon saying that human warfare contains lessons we've never considered. Something about psychological components." Ryle's primary eyes narrowed. "Psychological? We've studied psychological warfare extensively." "Apparently not like this," Mira replied, her voice resonating with the characteristic harmonic tones of her species. "The humans do something different." The viewing chamber was a massive hexagonal room with 6 distinct sections, each with its own atmospheric controls and seating designed for the particular physiology of the 6 allied species. The Viracs settled into their section, which had higher gravity and a denser oxygen mix than standard. The chamber's center held an advanced holographic projector capable of rendering 3-dimensional scenes with perfect clarity. Major Vorden, the Academy's senior tactical instructor, took his position at the control console, a tall, stern Praxian with the characteristic rigid posture of his militaristic species. He surveyed the cadets with cold, calculating eyes. "What you are about to witness," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber, "is unfiltered footage from Earth's military conflicts, spanning the last century of their history. These materials are classified and are shown to you as part of your advanced tactical training. You will observe, analyze, and learn from these records." Ryle felt a surge of anticipation. His entire life had led to this moment, following in his ancestors' footsteps, training to become a tactical officer. The Earth footage represented new knowledge, new strategies he could master. "Remember," Major Vorden continued, "you are viewing these materials as military professionals. Your emotional responses are irrelevant. Only tactical analysis matters." The lights dimmed, and the holographic projector hummed to life. The first footage began to play, a high-definition recording that appeared to be captured from an aerial vehicle. The landscape below was urban, densely packed buildings stretching to the horizon. The footage was remarkably clear, showing streets filled with what Ryle recognized as human civilians. Then came the first explosion. The shockwave rippled through the building, sending debris flying in all directions. The camera shook violently as more explosions followed, systematically demolishing structure after structure. Civilians ran in panic, some falling, others helping the wounded. The bombardment continued relentlessly, precise and methodical. Ryle felt his chest tighten. This wasn't like the simulations they'd studied, which focused on military targets and tactical movements. This was a civilian area being systematically destroyed. As the footage continued, it showed ground forces moving into the devastated area. Soldiers in combat gear moved from building to building, firing at unseen targets. The camera occasionally captured glimpses of resistance fighters, civilians with improvised weapons trying to defend their homes. When the lights came back on for the first discussion period, Ryle found himself struggling to maintain his composure. Around him, other cadets were already engaged in tactical analysis, pointing out flanking maneuvers and discussing the effectiveness of the bombardment pattern. The preliminary artillery strike effectively eliminated 78% of defensive positions, Cadet Mira was saying, her crystalline form shifting with excitement. The human forces demonstrated excellent coordination between air and ground assets. The use of thermobaric weapons in the confined urban environment was particularly effective, added another cadet, a Zygocian whose gelatinous body rippled with approval. Maximum structural damage with minimal military casualties. Ryle remained silent, his four eyes staring at the now empty projection space. The images of fleeing civilians kept replaying in his mind. Cadet Kina, Major Vorden's voice cut through Ryle's thoughts. Your analysis. Ryle straightened, military training taking over. Sir, I observed that the bombardment appeared to target civilian infrastructure rather than military objectives. Uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. That is not analysis, Cadet, Major Vorden replied coldly. That is an observation without tactical context. The operation you witnessed was designed to eliminate insurgent forces embedded within civilian populations. The tactical objective was achieved with optimal efficiency. But, sir, Ryle continued, unable to stop himself, there were children in those buildings. Major Vorden's eyes narrowed. Cadet, perhaps you misunderstood the purpose of this session. We are not here to discuss ethics. We are here to study effective warfare. If you cannot separate your personal feelings from tactical analysis, perhaps you should reconsider your suitability for command. Ryle felt his secondary eyes blink rapidly, a sign of distress among Viraks, but he forced himself to nod. Yes, sir. Understood, sir. The lights dimmed again, and the second footage began to play. This time, it showed what appeared to be an amphibious assault on a rocky coastline. Human forces in watercraft approached the shore under heavy fire from entrenched positions. The beach was narrow, bordered by steep cliffs, giving the defenders a significant advantage. The landing craft reached the shore, and soldiers poured out, immediately caught in devastating crossfire. Bodies fell by the dozens, some not even making it to the beach. Yet more craft approached, disgorging more soldiers into the slaughter. The water near the shore turned a darker color that Ryle recognized from his xenobiology classes as human blood. Despite the horrific casualties, the attacking forces pressed forward, using portable flamethrowers to clear defensive bunkers and eventually securing a foothold. The footage continued for nearly an hour, showing the gradual, costly advance up the cliffs and inland. When the lights came up again, the discussion was more subdued. Even the most enthusiastic cadets seemed sobered by the scale of casualties they had witnessed. The determination of the attacking forces was remarkable, said Jax, breaking the silence. They continued the assault despite losing over 50% of their initial landing force. "A wasteful approach," commented a Praxian cadet. "Our simulations would never approve such casualty rates." Major Vorden stepped forward. "And that, cadets, is precisely why we study human warfare. Their approach defies our conventional tactical doctrines, where we might calculate acceptable loss ratios and abort operations that exceed them. Humans have demonstrated a willingness to sustain catastrophic casualties to achieve objectives. But why?" The question came from Ryle before he could stop himself. "Why sacrifice so many when alternative approaches might exist?" "Because, Cadet Kina," Major Vorden replied with a hint of annoyance, "humans have historically valued the objective over the means. This is what makes them both dangerous and valuable allies. Their determination can be unpredictable by our standards." The third segment of footage showed something entirely different. Aircraft flying over agricultural areas, releasing clouds of chemicals that drifted down onto the crops below. At first, nothing seemed to happen. But as the footage continued, it showed time-lapse imagery of the vegetation withering and dying over a period of days. Then came footage of the human population in these areas. People coughing blood, children with blistered skin, mass graves being filled with emaciated bodies. "Chemical warfare," explained Major Vorden dispassionately. "Targeting the enemy's food supply and simultaneously weakening their population. A strategy that combines resource denial with population control." Reel felt physically ill. Around him, he noticed several other cadets shifting uncomfortably. This wasn't the honorable warfare he had trained for, the precise application of force against military targets to achieve political objectives. This was something else entirely. "Questions or analysis?" Major Vorden prompted. Silence filled the chamber. "Very well," the major continued, seemingly unperturbed by the cadet's reaction. "Let us move to the next segment." The fourth footage showed humanitarian aid workers attempting to deliver supplies to a besieged city. As they approached checkpoints, they were stopped, searched, and in many cases turned away. The footage showed civilians waiting for aid that never arrived, growing increasingly desperate. Some scenes showed protesters in city streets, facing off against armored vehicles and heavily armed soldiers. "Sir," a Zygocian cadet finally spoke up, "I don't understand the tactical relevance of this footage. These appear to be civilian matters." "An excellent observation," Major Vorden replied. "This demonstrates another aspect of human warfare, the weaponization of necessity. By controlling access to food, medicine, and other essentials, a military force can exert pressure on civilian populations, which in turn can influence political outcomes." Ryle felt something hardening inside him, a growing sense of discomfort that was rapidly transforming into outright rejection of what he was witnessing. This wasn't warfare as he understood it. This wasn't the honorable profession his family had served for generations. "We will take a brief recess before the final segment," announced Major Vorden. 15 minutes to refresh yourselves." In the Verac atmospheric section, Ryle turned to Jax. "Is this what we're training for? To starve civilians and poison farmland?" Jax's secondary eyes blinked rapidly. "It's just tactical education, Ryle. We need to understand all approaches to warfare, even if we never employ them." "How can you be so calm about this?" Ryle demanded. "That wasn't tactical education. That was... "War," Mira interrupted, approaching from her section. "Real war, not the sanitized simulations we've been running. Did you think real conflict would be clean and honorable? Our doctrines emphasize precision strikes against military targets," Ryle argued, "minimizing civilian casualties, preserving infrastructure. Those are our doctrines," Mira cut in. "Humans clearly develop different approaches. As officers, we need to understand them." "Understand them, or emulate them," Ryle shot back. Before Mira could respond, The signal for cadets to return to their positions sounded. The final segment was about to begin. The last footage was different from the others. It appeared to be captured by a handheld device, rather than military equipment. It showed the aftermath of an attack on what looked like a school or community center. The building was partially collapsed, and rescuers were digging through the rubble, pulling out injured children. The audio was intact on this recording, and the sounds of screaming and crying filled the chamber. A human female, covered in dust and blood, cradled a small child in her arms, her wails of grief transcending the language barrier. Reel felt something break inside him. Without conscious thought, he stood up from his seat. "Cadet Kana, resume your position," Major Vorden ordered sharply. Reel didn't move. Instead, he reached for the control panel near his section and silenced the audio in the Virac area. "This violates the Academy's own principles of war detachment," Ryle stated, his voice surprisingly steady. "We're being shown psychological trauma, not tactical information." Major Vorden's face hardened. "You are out of line, Cadet. Resume your seat immediately." "No, sir," Reel replied. "This isn't education. This is desensitization. You're not teaching us tactics. You're teaching us to become numb to atrocity." The chamber had gone completely silent, all eyes now fixed on the confrontation. "Cadet Kenna." Major Vorden's voice was dangerously quiet. "You are dismissed from this session. Report to the disciplinary officer immediately." "I won't be reporting to anyone," Ryle replied, reaching for his academy insignia. With deliberate movements, he unpinned it from his uniform. "I hereby resign from the Orion Alliance War Academy." Gasps echoed through the chamber. No cadet had ever resigned mid-training. It was practically unheard of. A disgrace to one's family and species. "You cannot resign without proper procedures," Major Vorden snapped. "This is insubordination." "No, sir," Ryle countered, placing his insignia on the console. "This is conscience, something this academy seems determined to eliminate." He turned to face the other cadets. "We joined to defend our worlds, not to learn how to terrorize civilians. If this is what the Alliance considers warfare, then I want no part of it." "Cadet Kana!" Major Vorden's voice thundered through the chamber. "You will face court-martial for this behavior." "You can't court-martial a civilian," Ryle replied calmly. "And as of this moment, that's what I am." With that, he walked toward the exit, his steps measured and deliberate. Behind him, the footage continued to play, the silent images of suffering children casting their glow over the stunned cadets. As the door closed behind him, Reel felt a curious mixture of terror and relief. His family would be dishonored, his future uncertain, but for the first time since arriving at the academy, he felt true to himself. In the hours that followed, the academy erupted into chaos. Ryle's unprecedented resignation triggered emergency protocols. Security officers were dispatched to escort him to containment, but he offered no resistance, calmly completing the necessary documentation to formalize his resignation. Word spread quickly through the cadet quarters. Some condemned Reel as a coward, others as a traitor to his species. But a small number, those who had been equally disturbed by the footage, whispered that perhaps he had shown the greatest courage of all. Jax found Ryle in his quarters, packing his few personal belongings. "Have you lost your mind?" Jax demanded, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. 7 generations of service, Ryle, 7 generations of honor, and you've thrown it all away. Reel continued packing methodically. "Is it honor to bomb civilians? To starve children? To poison farmland? If that's honor, then I choose disgrace." "It was just footage," Jax argued. "Educational material. We weren't being asked to do those things." "Weren't we?" Reel turned to face his friend. "Why show us those tactics if not to prepare us to use them? Why desensitize us to suffering if not to make us capable of causing it?" Jax's secondary eyes blinked rapidly in distress. The Academy Council is in emergency session. There's still time to retract your resignation. Claim temporary emotional distress. I'm not distressed, Ryle interrupted. For the first time. I'm thinking clearly. We've been indoctrinated. Jax. Taught to see warfare as an abstract exercise. A game of positions and resources. Today I saw what it really is. Suffering and death. Inflicted by those who have learned not to care. So what will you do? Jax asked, his voice softening. Where will you go? Ryle closed his pack. There are other ways to serve. The Outer Colony Relief Corps is always looking for volunteers. A relief worker? Jax couldn't hide his incredulity. You were top of our tactical class. You were destined for command. I was destined to follow my conscience, Ryle corrected him. Something I forgot until today. A chime at the door interrupted them. When it slid open, Mira stood there, her crystalline form reflecting the corridor lights. The Council wants to see you, she told Ryle. Immediately. The Academy Council chamber was imposing by design. Its high ceiling and circular arrangement of elevated seats meant to intimidate those called before it. The 7 senior officers, 1 from each allied species, plus the Academy commander, looked down at Real with expressions ranging from anger to curiosity. Cadet Kina, began Commander Laris, an elderly Thraxian whose scales had faded from their youthful green to a distinguished gray. Your actions today are unprecedented in the history of this institution. Former cadet, Ryle corrected politely. I have submitted my resignation, which the Council has not accepted, Commander Laris replied sternly. Resignation during active training requires Council approval. With respect, Commander, Ryle said, standing at perfect attention despite no longer considering himself bound by military protocol. The Allied Species Charter, Section 12, Paragraph 7, states that no individual can be compelled to serve against their conscience. My resignation was effective the moment I declared it. A murmur ran through the Council. Clearly, they hadn't expected Ryle to cite charter law. Legal technicalities aside, growled Major Vorden, who sat among the Council members. Your behavior was a disgrace to this institution and to your species. You disrupted a crucial training session and undermined discipline. I disrupted what I believe to be an unethical indoctrination, Ryle countered. The footage shown today violated multiple provisions of the Alliance Ethical Combat Directives, which this Academy is sworn to uphold. You are not qualified to make such determinations, Major Vorden snapped. If I am not qualified after 3 years of training, Ryle replied evenly, then this Academy has failed in its mission to produce ethical officers capable of independent moral judgment. Commander Laris raised a hand to silence Major Vorden before he could respond. Ryle Kina, your academic record has been exemplary until now. Your instructors speak highly of your tactical acumen and leadership potential. Is there nothing we can say to persuade you to reconsider this rash decision? Real's 4 eyes met the commander's gaze directly. With respect, Commander, if you had seen what I saw today and still consider my decision rash, then we have fundamentally different understandings of what military service should be. And what should it be, in your view? Asked a Kalthari council member, her crystalline form shifting with curiosity. Protection, not destruction, Ryle answered without hesitation. Defense, not terror. If we adopt the worst tactics of our potential adversaries, we become indistinguishable from them. The footage today showed military forces terrorizing the very civilians they should be protecting. If that is what the Alliance is preparing us for, then I cannot serve. Silence fell over the chamber as the council members exchanged glances. The training materials were selected to expose cadets to the realities of warfare. Commander Laris finally said, not to endorse all tactics shown. Then, why was there no ethical context provided? Ryle challenged. No discussion of which approaches violated Alliance principles? Instead, Major Vorden praised the efficiency of bombing civilian areas and the effectiveness of chemical warfare against agricultural regions. Major Vorden's face darkened with anger. But Commander Laris spoke before he could. These are valid concerns that perhaps warrant review of our educational approaches. However, your method of raising these concerns, public insubordination, cannot be condoned. I understand, Ryle said simply. And I accept the consequences of my actions. My resignation stands. Commander Laris sighed, the sound whistling through his Thraxian breathing slits. Very well. The Council will accept your resignation, with a notation of departure under contested circumstances, rather than the usual dishonorable discharge. Your species representative argued persuasively that your academic record and the unusual nature of today's events warrant this consideration. Ryle nodded, surprised by this small mercy. Thank you, Commander. Do not thank me, Commander Laris replied grimly. You are throwing away a promising career. Your family's 7 generations of service ends with you. That is a heavy burden to bear. Heavier would be the burden of participating in what I saw today. Ryle answered quietly. Some traditions should end. He was dismissed shortly thereafter, escorted to the transport bay by security officers who maintained a respectful distance. As he prepared to board the shuttle that would take him to the civilian transfer station, he was surprised to find Mira waiting. I didn't expect to see you here, Ryle admitted. Mira's crystalline form shifted in the equivalent of a Kalthari shrug. I didn't expect to come, but after you left, things changed. How so? Other cadets started questioning the footage, the tactics. Even some who initially criticized you began to ask whether we should be learning such approaches. Her crystalline structure glinted under the bay lights. The Council has suspended the Earth footage program pending comprehensive review. Ryle felt a surprising surge of satisfaction. So, some good came of this after all. Don't get too pleased with yourself, Mira warned. You're still considered a disgrace by most, but not by all. She extended a crystalline appendage, offering a small data chip. Some contact information, cadets who share your concerns. They may reach out to you, in time. Ryle accepted the chip, tucking it into his civilian clothes. Thank you, Mira. Don't thank me yet, she replied. You have a difficult path ahead. The military community is tight-knit. Word of your resignation will spread. I know, Ryle acknowledged. But there are other communities, other ways to serve. The transport chimed its final boarding call. Good luck, Rilkana, Mira said formally. Your courage was unexpected, but not unnoticed. 6 months later, Ryle stood at the perimeter of the Outer Colony Relief Corps camp on Deimos 9, scanning the horizon with his 4 eyes. The refugee settlement stretched before him, temporary dwellings housing civilians displaced by the border conflict between the Alliance and the Trilaxian Imperium. The work was hard, distributing supplies, setting up medical facilities, coordinating with other relief organizations. But every day, Ril found purpose in the grateful eyes of those he helped. Here, he wasn't building skills to destroy. He was using his abilities to preserve, protect, and heal. His family had reacted as expected: shock, dismay, and eventually a formal notice of disownment. The name Kina was no longer his to use. According to Virak tradition, he was now simply Ril, a civilian relief worker with no family ties. The pain of that rejection remained, a constant ache beneath his daily activities. But alongside it grew a quiet certainty that he had made the right choice. A commotion at the camp entrance drew his attention. A new transport had arrived, bringing more refugees and a fresh rotation of relief workers. As Ryle moved to assist with the offloading of supplies, a familiar figure caught his eye. "Jax," he called in disbelief. His former friend approached, wearing the same civilian relief corps uniform that Ryle now wore. His expression was a mixture of embarrassment and determination. "Hello, Ril," Jax greeted him. Or do you go by another name now? Just Ryle, he confirmed. My family made that quite clear. He studied Jax's uniform with confusion. What are you doing here? What happened to your commission? Jax's secondary eyes blinked rapidly. I resigned 3 weeks ago. You? But why? Jax looked away, focusing on the refugee camp. They continued the footage program, with ethical context discussions as a concession to the controversy you started. But the third segment, he trailed off, his 4 eyes blinking in distress. It was worse than what you saw. Much worse. And the ethical discussion was just justification, rationalization. Real felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, sadness, and a strange pride in his friend. Your family disowned me, of course. Jax finished for him. 7 generations, just like yours. Both ended with us. He managed what passed for a smile among Viracs. Maybe we started something new instead. Before Ryle could respond, an alarm sounded from the medical tent. Both former cadets immediately shifted to alert posture. Some training never faded. Incoming wounded, called a Thraxian medical officer. Border skirmish casualties, mostly civilians. We need all hands. As they rushed toward the medical area, Jax asked, Do you regret it? Leaving the academy? Real glanced at the approaching transport, already seeing the injured being unloaded. The consequences of the very warfare they had refused to participate in. Never, he answered firmly. We were trained to win wars. Here, we're trying to end one. I know which side I prefer. They worked through the night, treating plasma burns, shrapnel wounds, and radiation exposure. The casualties were primarily from a frontier settlement caught in crossfire, exactly the kind of collateral damage that had been clinically analyzed in those academy sessions. Near dawn, as the situation finally stabilized, Real found himself treating a young Thraxian child whose scales were still the vibrant green of youth. The child had lost a limb to a thermal detonation, but would survive with proper care. Will I be strong again? The child asked in halting Alliance standard. Ryle carefully adjusted the regeneration field around the child's injury. Stronger, he promised. Strong enough to build instead of destroy. That's the real strength. The child didn't fully understand, but seemed comforted by Ryle's confidence. As the first light of the system's twin suns crept over the horizon, Ryle stepped outside the medical tent, exhausted but satisfied. Jax joined him, equally drained. I received a message yesterday, Jax said after a comfortable silence. From the academy. Apparently, we're not alone. 15 more cadets have resigned since you left. They're calling it the Kina Rebellion now. Real's secondary eyes widened in surprise. 15? That's unprecedented. The Academy Council is in crisis, Jax continued. They're re-evaluating the entire ethical training program. Commander Laris issued a statement about reaffirming the Alliance's commitment to ethical warfare. Ethical warfare, Ryle repeated. An oxymoron if ever there was one. Perhaps, Jax acknowledged. But isn't some ethical standard better than none? Isn't it better that future officers question what they're shown, rather than simply absorb it? Ryle considered this as he watched medical workers continuing to tend to the injured. I suppose that's true. Change has to start somewhere. It started with you, Jax pointed out. One cadet standing up in a viewing chamber. Ryle shook his head. It started with the footage, with the reality of what warfare actually does. I just refused to accept the lie that it was necessary or honorable. In the distance, a new transport was landing. More supplies, more personnel. The work never ended here on the frontier, where the consequences of political decisions played out in flesh and blood. There's a group forming, Jax said quietly. Former military personnel who share our concerns. They're advocating for stricter adherence to the ethical combat directives, more civilian oversight of military operations. Some are even pushing for fundamental reforms in how the Alliance approaches conflict resolution. Sounds like something worth supporting, Ryle replied. They want you to speak at their next forum. Your resignation has become something of a symbol. Real's 4 eyes blinked in surprise. Me? I'm just a relief worker now. You're more than that, Jax insisted. You're proof that individual conscience can stand against institutional pressure. That's powerful, especially coming from someone with your academic record and family history. Before Real could respond, a call came from the medical tent. Another emergency requiring attention. Both former cadets immediately moved to assist. The conversation temporarily shelved. Hours later, crisis averted, and a new batch of patients stabilized. Ryle returned to his quarters, a simple prefabricated unit on the camp's perimeter. On his desk sat the small hollow projector containing his family's service records, the one possession he had kept from his previous life. He activated it, scrolling through the images of his ancestors in their military uniforms, each bearing the Kina insignia with pride. 7 generations of service to the Varek Defense Forces, and then the Orion Alliance, tactical officers, ship commanders, academy instructors. What would they think of him now? Disowned, stripped of his family name, working in a refugee camp instead of commanding a tactical unit. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts, a message arriving on his personal comm. It was from an unfamiliar source, encrypted with privacy protocols. Curious. Ryle opened it. The message was brief, but stunning. Major Vorden resigned his commission today, cited irreconcilable ethical concerns, following review of complete Earth footage archives. You started something. Real. It's spreading. A friend at the academy. Real sat back, momentarily unable to process what he'd read. Major Vorden, the embodiment of unquestioning military discipline. The officer who had dismissed ethical concerns as irrelevant to tactical education, had resigned. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. Jax stood there, holding a datapad. Have you seen the news? Jax asked, without preamble. About Vorden? Just now, Real confirmed, still stunned. I can hardly believe it. It's all over the Alliance networks, Jax said, handing over the datapad. He issued a statement. You should read it. The statement was brief, but powerful. Major Vorden acknowledged that after reviewing the complete Earth warfare archives, beyond the segments selected for cadet training, he had come to question the ethical foundations of the Alliance's military doctrine. He specifically cited the courage of a former cadet who recognized what I, with all my experience, failed to see as the catalyst for his reassessment. He's referring to you, Jax said unnecessarily. Real set down the datapad. This changes everything. If someone like Vorden can reconsider, it validates what you did, Jax finished for him. And it makes it easier for others to follow. Later that night, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion, Real stood outside his quarters, gazing up at the stars. Somewhere among those distant points of light was the Academy, continuing its mission of training the Alliance's future officers. But perhaps that mission was evolving, shaped by the actions of one cadet who had refused to accept what he was shown. A Kalthari relief worker approached, her crystalline form gleaming under the starlight. It took Ryle a moment to recognize Mira, her structure slightly altered from when he had last seen her at the Academy. Reporting for duty, she said simply. Real's 4 eyes widened. You too? But you were so committed to your military career. I was committed to serving my people and the Alliance, Mira corrected. I've found a better way to do that. She gestured toward the refugee camp. Real service, not theoretical exercises. How many more? Ryle asked. How many have left the Academy? 23 now, Mira replied. Enough that the Alliance Security Council has opened a formal inquiry into military education practices. There's talk of civilian oversight committees, ethical review boards for training materials. Real felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, the burden of doubt he had carried since that day in the viewing chamber. So it wasn't for nothing. Far from it, Mira assured him. You've started something, real. A reevaluation of what it means to serve, of what warfare should and shouldn't be. Together, they looked out over the refugee camp, where the consequences of conflict played out in real lives, not holographic projections or tactical scenarios. We have early transport duties tomorrow, Ryle finally said. The new civilian evacuation from Sector 7 is scheduled to arrive before dawn. I'll be ready, Mira promised. This is where we're needed now. As they parted ways, Ryle took one last look at the stars. His path had diverged dramatically from the one his family had followed for generations. He had lost his name, his inheritance, his place in Virac society. But he had kept something more valuable, his conscience, his ability to look at suffering and recognize it as wrong. His refusal to accept that atrocity could be justified by tactical necessity. In the academy, they had tried to teach him detachment, to view warfare as an abstract exercise in strategy and logistics. But the Earth footage had shown the reality behind the abstractions, the human cost of conflict, the suffering that no tactical briefing ever mentioned. One cadet's refusal had sparked something unexpected, a movement, a reconsideration, perhaps even a reformation. It wasn't what Ryle had intended when he stood up in that viewing chamber, but it was something he could be proud of. Tomorrow would bring more refugees, more injuries to treat, more lives to help rebuild. It wasn't the glorious military career his family had envisioned for him, but it was honorable work, perhaps the most honorable work of all. As the camp settled into night cycle quiet, Ryle returned to his quarters. On his desk, the holoprojector still displayed his family's service records. With a decisive gesture, he switched it off. 7 generations had ended with him, but something new had begun. A different kind of service, a different understanding of honor, a different path forward. It was enough. 1 year after Ryle's resignation, the Orion Alliance War Academy unveiled its new curriculum. Earth warfare footage was still included, but now, within a comprehensive ethical framework. Each viewing session began with a formal acknowledgement of the Alliance ethical combat directives and included facilitated discussions about the moral implications of the tactics shown. More significantly, the Academy had established a new requirement. All cadets now spent 1 training cycle with civilian relief organizations, witnessing firsthand the aftermath of conflict. The program was officially called Comprehensive Tactical Context Training, but among the cadets, it had another name, the Cana Perspective. Ryle never returned to the academy, never reclaimed his family name, never rejoined the military establishment he had rejected. But his action, that single moment of conscience in a viewing chamber, had catalyzed a transformation that continued to ripple through the Alliance. In a refugee camp on a distant frontier world, he found a different kind of honor, not in the tactical application of force, but in the patient work of healing what warfare had broken. It wasn't the legacy his ancestors had planned for him, but as he watched former enemies work side by side to rebuild their communities, he knew it was the right one. The Earth footage that had changed his life continued to be studied by new generations of cadets. But now, alongside the tactical analysis, they learned another lesson, that the true measure of a military officer wasn't their ability to win at any cost, but their capacity to recognize when that cost became too high. It was a lesson written not in tactical manuals or strategic doctrines, but in the simple action of one cadet who stood up and said, "No, this is wrong." And that, perhaps, was the most important tactical lesson of all.